This idea, this ECVM idea, is just meant to be a way to talk about uh, economics in a way that we don't get too carried away with the Web3 stuff and crypto. We don't necessarily need that to implement this idea. We could actually do this on paper. So that was the reason for this kind of a look to the to the machine conceptually. So the claim here is that we need to actually make it so that the user gains the material sources of production, especially land. We call this a concept property left. So then what we do is we separate value, all real world value, into four types: money, land, work, and good. And we issue these legally binding tokens: a coin for money, deed for land, bond for work, and ticket for good. And then we attempt to implement this so that we can cancel out financial values and actually turn them into what we call value zeros. Because when you trade reward for land, the monetary wage you earn is zero. And when you own land, in other words, hold deeds to own your home, you pay zero rent. And when you both hold the land and hold the future work of others, hold bond signatures of others, then you own those future goods without purchase, so the profit you pay is also zero. And so during the funding stage, anybody can submit the size and price of land for sale. The ECVM will mint coins, one per each square meter, and then it will sell those coins. This is a little confused. I should make this better, but the idea is that we're going to sell these coins to people that don't really intend to live on this land, most likely. They're just playing the numbers go up game. Does that make sense? Anyway, once they get the coins, they don't have any say, no governance, no ownership. They're just playing the coin game. Then most likely a different set of people will come in to do the building. And the building actually starts with the select tickets, which is what you do is you figure out what goods you want produced in the future, like, say, bread and honey and stuff. And then the ECVM will mint those tickets, and then you sell those. Oh, this is maybe the better way of doing it. This is all screwed up. So once the ECVM gets the size and price of the land, it will mint the coins based on the minimum bid found from those parameters, and then sell them to buy the land. And then it asks the people they're going to try to live on that land, what future goods do you want? Mints the tickets, and then each ticket requires many different kinds of work. Usually, like the bread would require a farmer, a miller, and a baker, conceptually. So then it mints the bonds for each kind of work. I sometimes call these contracts because it's maybe better, but I was moving away from that because of contract is used too much in the Web3 arena and all that. So that issues the deeds. So these deeds and the bonds, each one of those, the ticket has a list of deeds and a list of bonds, each ticket that describes exactly how it's going to be fulfilled. Okay, so then it says, look, if you'll sign a bond, I'm going to give you we're going to offer you many tickets for each bond signature. That allows us to solve the simultaneous coincidence of wants problem that barter usually faces. Then as you complete your work, the many deeds that are backing the tickets you selected, those are the deeds you receive. So if you're like a plumber or let's just say, you're working in as a plumber and you selected, one of the tickets you selected was bread, you don't ever have to work in any part of this bread supply chain, but you still end up receiving bread at the cost of production, and you end up receiving part of a farm and part of a mill and part of a bakery. So, anyone have any questions? Can I help you? I feel like it's hard to understand this stuff.
Would it be totally incorrect to think of this like a localized commitment pool kind of thing? Yeah, because it seems like you're dealing with like commitments around like land use and commitments for work and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it seems a little more focused on like if you actually have a place-based community where you're dealing with where you want some kind of automated land trust or something. Am I reading that kind of correctly?
Yeah. It has a lot of the elements of the Sarafu, and other versions of what the commitment pooling. Yes, I don't know which. I wonder which one you're talking about, but the one from Will Ruddick is the one I'm thinking of right now. But
yeah, that's what it reminded me of a little bit. Just in terms of issuing tokens for diverse, commitments. It could potentially represent anything, but then you kind of build around that. Yeah, cool.
yeah, and I'm actually still trying to figure out and kind of unmix some of this because, like, so in the case of the Sarafu, the commitment pooling, they talk about goods and services being put into that commitment pool, and I understand that, and it makes a lot of sense. And I've done a lot of that. I'll say the phrase goods and services, but I've kind of recently been thinking that tickets really represent the what I want to call goods or production, and then services are that's actually part of the bond or contract. That's the work side. The reason I don't know how to fix it, but the reason I think it needs to get fixed is because, especially as work gets taken over by the robots, we'll have to get that unmixed. Yeah. And the other difference, of course, is that in this case, we're trying to actually distribute land ownership, whereas the work pooling, I haven't seen that idea. They'll usually use a trust. And I understand the reason that they do that in the so-called non-dominium, which is used by the OVN guys, the Open Value Network, Tiberius. I think, and I understand why they do that because they don't want people to sell the land and all that. But I think that if we can make it so that people can earn land by working, and if we always have that avenue open, I think it can actually end up finally being safe to allow the land to be sold, even. But not by the ECVM itself, by the way. What I mean is, the ECVM would never sell land for money. It's set up to not do that conceptually. But if you were to work some amount of time and earn land ownership, I think it actually could be okay to allow you to sell that. And I don't even know how we could stop you from selling it. Well, I mean, the way we would stop it was we put it in a trust instead, correct? But I'll just end it with this part: is that one of the worries I have with the trusts is that then they'll be like saying they end up looking like an HOA, and they're like, oh well, we got to have maintenance, so we got to charge you all this money to do the monthly maintenance.
What is an HOA? Sorry.
Homeowners Association in the United States it's like this micro government over a neighborhood that most people don't have very many good things to say about them. But yeah, there are a sort of structure that is used to kind of govern neighborhoods, and I kind of see a little bit of the DAO, the way the DAOs have played out. It has some of that problem too, is because we just assume there needs to be a council. And by the way, I'm partly wrong, I think too. We probably do need councils. I think that councils end up getting in the way too. So I'm trying to answer your question about, or at least what I thought was a question about the idea of using trust instead of distributing real ownership.
It is a good point. Like a lot of land trusts, they turn really toxic. I know, like in the area where I'm from, a lot of times they're started with good intentions, but effectively they're just kind of groups of well-intentioned landlords. And that comes with all the material interests it does. And yeah, they might make a cool trust, but it doesn't really turn into something that's like a real service to the public good, or all of the people who want to participate in it. It's just kind of there to serve the interests of the people who founded it. And usually they are board governed, so you really are putting a lot of trust in that land trust. You're entrusting your land to it, right? It's kind of a big deal. So things can go awry, and more often it's just drama. A vending machine doesn't have drama. So if we can abstract some of those trusted relationships to a trusted machine, and really focus our social interactions on building actual human trust and real human value between us, relationally, materially, and otherwise, that seems like a win for everyone involved, because humans aren't the best at some things, universally.
So it sounded like you are a DAO, kind of a DAO, kind of a guy. I've only done a tiny bit of that. What is your impression, or how would you compare the DAO approach to things like HOAs or trusts? Does it have some of that in it, do you think?
I mean, there's certainly a lot of parallels when it comes to just the drama and organizational psychology and all that stuff. And certainly like ways it deviates, right? They're mostly digital communities. I don't think there's a whole lot of parallels. I'm also not an HOA person, nor do I have land. So yeah, I'm not intimately familiar with like the internal workings of that side of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of common challenges, though, right? You are dealing with some common property. Either it's your collective funds. Sometimes that's a lot. Sometimes it's a whole protocol. Um, or a bunch of land together. Things like that. So there's a lot at stake. And the more that's at stake, the more you're trying to get done, the more the negative interpersonal and organizational dynamics come to bear. So yeah, I think there's probably good learnings from either side to incorporate, but I don't know if there's a whole lot of direct parallels.
Yeah, I think that was my thinking was a little too loose there, but uh, part of what I think we're trying to figure out here is almost like there's almost a continuum between very chaotic situation and a very overly controlled situation. I think we need to find some sort of balance between it. Like on the one very chaotic situation, or something that doesn't have enough maybe of a council, is something like, and I don't know all the details, but I've heard of the place called Slab City, where it's no real doesn't seem to be enough structure, and people are kind of going wild there. And like, anyway, the way I talk about it is that I don't want councils, but I'm just trying to admit that it's hard to do something without having some sort of centralized structure so that we have somewhere to just kind of go and like say what's going on, like a bulletin board or something. But anyway, hopefully the ECVM concept as a vending machine, that we can do the bulk of the boring stuff without needing a human council. And
So Patrick, I have
yeah.
something I don't understand is like, so the legal ownership, who owns the land legally? Like, if I imagine like I put some like 10 hours of work, like what do I get? I get a deed, but that's like, is that a legal document? Is it not? Like, who owns legally the land?
Yeah, my hope and what I'm trying to get done here is that we actually do transfer real legally binding ownership to each individual person as they earn those deeds. So, but as that's occurring, and it will kind of almost always be occurring as we're purchasing land, what happens is at first the ECVM, using a trust or using something, that a legal entity that can temporarily hold that land, it temporarily holds that land so that it can slowly vest that land, the ownership of it, to the workers, and by the way, also to the people that pay profit. If you pay profit, you have to get you also gain a tiny bit of ownership. But I'd like to hear what you have to say about the drawbacks of actually distributing the real land ownership to the people. Because I know most people think that's a bad idea that I've talked to. They
I mean, what comes to my mind is like how feasible that is, right? Like, if you are talking like what, like 20 square meters, like, is it possible to legally like divide land as you want? And I don't know, like, how possible that is.
Yeah, what I was thinking about that part is, I'm a software engineer, and I think about things a little bit too much like the way that computers work, probably. So this is maybe a little bit off or confusing, but there's an idea of virtual memory in computers where you let the main system, some of the system thinks that there's so much memory, and other parts of the system, they know that there actually isn't that much memory. So I don't know if that helps, but what I'm trying to say is, for any time the government that's outside of our, that we're inside of, like say, let's say we went outside of city limits to build one of these, and so we still have county. I'm talking about United States. You have county governments, state governments, and the federal government. You have those three layers after that. And in each case, they're going to be, in this case, they could be the county. Maybe the county would say something like you're bringing up. You can't chop up the land that fine grained. We're just not going to allow it. I think we could just, we can make it so that it looks fine grained like that inside internally, and we'll treat it as though it were legally binding. And then when people want to leave or adjust their things, we can kind of resolve that difference with the government. I don't know if that makes sense. We don't have to actually have that level of fine grained that granularity at the truly legal level, but internally we can take that the legality internally into our terms of operation.
Yeah, that's what I would imagine actually.
Okay, cool.
I know like Keen was asking something. If you want to unmute Keen, or
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I just trying to like picture how this what kind of like scenario that this machine is actually working, but like I kind of like thinking in which situation that this machine that you are talking about is very practical. But like how would you like describe the scenario, or how would you like tell me more about like how you imagine the world where this machine is working? What is like, is it happen? Can it happen like in our current situations, like nowadays, like 2025, or you pictures that might like need some kinds of like factor to be changed in order for such machine to like to work in the way that you like think about it. I try to like follow the logic, get my head around of the thing that you're talking about. Just only the basic question.
You're asking if I think that we could implement it today, or whether we would need to wait. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, something like that, or maybe like when you start thinking about the machine, like how would you picture, the scenario that okay, if this work, this is what's gonna happen, something like that.
Oh, okay, right. Well, well, actually, user ownership happens inside of a household all the time. And so let me try to explain what I mean there. So when you, for example, especially if you include the garden in this and stuff like that, then you can see what I'm saying. So when you own a garden, when you have a house and you have a garden, then you own the produce, that garden is going to create. You don't have to buy it from yourself, obviously, but you also usually do the work. So it's not really clear. Is it because you own it because you're the worker, or do you own it because you're the owner? Or I mean, I'm saying we're talking about the profit part, but what I'm trying to bring up here is that when you know when you have a larger situation, if you've ever been on a big farm or something where there's many families and things, you can buy things in bulk, or you can grow things that are larger situations where you can get them at the cost of production. And so I think what this would produce is that it would produce a situation where we can own our homes without paying rent and without paying interest on any sort of debt. So we wouldn't have to pay either of those things for the homes. And then we could own our supply chains. I think the essential supply chains, I'm not personally not super concerned about. I mean, we would eventually own all the supply chains, I believe, too, but not at first. And so we're going to still be buying things from all over the world, as we transition. And I don't even think we need to ban international trade or anything, but we just won't need nearly as much of it, especially for things that are critical, like, food. I mean, it's just ridiculous it's just militarily dangerous that if we allow ourselves to be put into a situation where we are not self-sovereign with our food and our other basic necessities. So what I envision it happening is that these, I call them sometimes a minimum viable village. Each of these minimum viable villages will be able to produce enough that they can survive, plus enough surplus that they can even grow. And but I'm trying to answer, how is it different than just whatever, a cooperative or whatever? And the thing is that I, like with the regular, usually you would think of people going to, like, say, a farmer's market or something and buying the stuff that has been produced by the workers. And so it's this, that's the way that looks. And with this, there will, oh my gosh, I don't really know how to say it out loud. Usually before you even get there, you already own it. So you just show up at the farmer's market, you show them your tickets, and you pay. So you still have to do the transaction, but you don't have to, you don't have to wonder if it's there because you already know that you own it. Oh my God, I don't think that was a good answer, but something I think that's much more important in some ways is that when the users own the means of production, they don't ever need to worry about something called overproduction. Now, overproduction is a crazy conundrum in economics where, and this happened during the Great Depression, by the way, and was documented in the book called The Grapes of Wrath, where farmers, because of mechanization, they had become very productive. And so one farmer could produce as much as 10 people, maybe even 100 people in the past because of these new threshing machines and other things. So the market was flooded with overproduction. There was too much stuff. This is during the Great Depression. And then you must be, it's hard to not think, well, with all those starving people, obviously you just give the food to the starving people, but you can't do that because the farmers have to sell it for more than it costs to get this thing called profit. And the reason they have to do that is because usually they're in debt. And so if they don't do that, then they get foreclosed on. And that's what happened to a lot of farmers during the Great Depression. So this quest for artificial scarcity becomes a non-issue during user ownership, because when you own a tree because you need apples, you don't care if there's 1 trillion extra apples. It doesn't hurt you. But if you own them because you need to sell them, then the market is flooded, and that abundance actually causes you a problem.
It's funny you mentioned that because as you were describing this, I was thinking of kind of some of the local history around vouchers and clearinghouses, which is described in the Grapes of Wrath, right? I'm from Northern California. And it seems to me like having a system like this, 100 years ago, probably could have helped with a lot of problems, specifically in how we handled that produce, which there was a whole lot of it coming to market. Only so much of it could be sold. And in the East Bay of the local economy was propped up by fruit vouchers, because there were a lot of folks bringing produce into packing facilities and coolers and ports, and only so much of it could actually be handled. We produce far more food than we actually consume here. And so a lot of it had to be diverted into local supply chains, but it's really hard in Northern California, even today, to get the produce we make to eat. It's not like it's a food desert or anything, but it's still just hard to get a hold of this stuff sometimes. From a very comparatively from like a privileged American food system kind of perspective. But back then it was really an issue. Like, people were starving. So really a huge portion of the money that was circulating was the vouchers they would give to farmers to then take this oversupply and distribute out to the people who needed it. And then the farmers could then take those to the clearinghouse and get other things that they needed, because they couldn't sell it for money, but they could go into East Oakland and they could get other stuff that they needed. And they had a lot of resources and a lot of skilled labor, and they had a lot, just not a whole lot of money. And that problem continues to this day. And the voucher system allowed them to unlock different forms of capital, not just fruit, right? It was the fruit was the token they issued to recognize the exogenous input in as a subsidy for or a substitute for cash. But that voucher then unlocked all of the non-financial capital in the community, because then they were able to trade that for fruit. Right. And then, of course, that just became a currency, and you could trade fruit vouchers for whatever you needed. And that's happened several times throughout the East Bay history. Which, it's, you can read the Grapes of Wrath if you want to know about the problem behind it. But having these sorts of systems where place-based communities you know, even if you're not just considering land, right? If you're just bringing a new value framework to a place that has inherent value, recognizing the exogenous inputs and then recognizing what people are doing to then, you know, consume those. I mean, like, you don't have to like have some sort of fiat money system. You know, in emergencies they circulate and they serve the purpose until they're not needed anymore. But if we can have a durable system that allows us to use that all the time, we don't have to wait until an emergency happens to have to build this reactively. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. That's interesting. I didn't know specifically of the fruit vouchers. I just know of the voucher concept.
It's a whole Red Scare communist purge history. You know, like in the book, a lot of folks came out from the Dust Bowl. A lot of those folks are immigrants from different sorts of communist and socialist places, and you know, they all gathered in the East Bay just out of circumstance and had to make it work in the middle of the Depression. So there was a lot of cool communism happening, but due to coordination failure, there were a lot of unfortunate outcomes, as well as, you know, the you know, they help people survive at the same time. So it was a mixed bag. But then, yeah, the government totally crushed them. Then, you know, the Black Panthers came back and they trashed them again. It's the history in Oakland.
Oh, okay. Dang. No, I've gone looking at this chat thing that says, Siri says I'm lost. Can you talk to me a little bit, Siri? Carrie?
Hey, I'm just so I don't I
It's confusing. I know.
Hey Siri, we
I don't know if you're still there. Are you talking?
Yeah.
I'm still there. I just don't know what to say.
Oh, okay.
I can go.
Um,
I have another question, Patrick. Um, so I find like the financing mechanism, like I don't know, like what's your? My question is basically, have you thought about other financing mechanisms other than this Bitcoin like
Don't hear you anymore.
coin, or
Oh, uh-huh.
have you thought about other financing mechanisms, or like why
Yes.
do you go for this like yeah, basically
Okay.
expecting people to buy like a coin that is yeah, like that.
Okay. Yeah. Actually, this document that I opened here, this called the business model. It makes it more clear that the coin is an optional funding mechanism. So
So
wait a second, where'd it go?
what other options did you have in mind, or do you suggest?
Yeah, I think that um, we can attract financial investors because I think we can just use regular traditional like Shark Tank kind of investors, you know, angel venture capitalists. They should have very high profit margins because internally we don't really use hardly any money internally. So when we're selling extra apples or whatever, the monetary amount that we've put into those apples eventually will, you know, be approach zero. Let me just ask you if you understand why that's true.
No, can you explain?
Okay, so since we're not going to pay wages, we're not going to pay monetary wages to the workers. So that's one big cost we don't have to pay. And as we make anything we're going to sell on the open market, the internal markup is zero because we're fully vertically integrated. Vertically integrated means we own the supply chain from the very beginning to the very end. And this isn't perfect at first. A lot of stuff we won't own. I mean, especially because this is kind of a recursive problem. Like we're not going to own the shovels. We're just going to buy stuff off the shelf at first, right? And then we don't have to pay rent on or mortgages on any of the productive assets. Like we don't have a mortgage on the farm. We don't have a mortgage on the mill or in the bakery or any of the stuff internally. So because of these 3 zeros, we end up having very high profit margins.
Yes, but
Essentially 100% in the end. Go ahead. I didn't hear you.
yeah, but like you only say sell that much, right? Like you only sell the surplus.
Mhm. Yeah, but we will need to make sure that we have enough extra land to produce more than we need so that we can sell that surplus to pay those financial investors.
Yeah. Yeah, that
I'll just drop this link in case you want to see that. Okay, well, any other questions or how can I help?
if I do have more
Bryn
questions.
Noet.
I don't know if anyone else wants to go. I see Brent typing. Another question is like maybe Keen was also pointing at that, like how if we want to start something like this, like tomorrow, or say like in 2 months, like uh, yeah, or like in other words, also like, have you tried to implement this, and what have you learned, what has worked, what not, on
Mhm.
etc.
Mhm.
And what is it
Well,
that you're missing, or
yeah. Um, I'm not a very good web developer, so I did make a web approach this Web3. I built on a place called Near, N-E-A-R, near.org. They have their own blockchain. So the coin itself is actually issued. It has a hard cap of 510 trillion. And what's stopping me? I think what stops the system from being used is that it's just not understood. It's so confusing. It's not really super complicated once you understand, but it's a very different way of looking at the world, and so it's hard to communicate it for me. And I think I appreciate you guys spending the effort here, but it's a tough road. I think if we could get it understood, we could get this going almost, just tomorrow, almost just start selling the coins. It's really not that much infrastructure to create.
So what's the core motivation?
Why do any of this?
I'm just trying to understand this, and so I'm trying to find a starting point that I can use.
Yeah. For me, I think what it is primarily is that we need to be able to own our homes. It's just terrible that we can't own our homes. We have no chance of owning our homes. And so if we only owned our homes, that would be a lot of people pay near half their income just because they're paying rent, but rent can be eradicated. We're working for the system because the property is not properly allocated is the only reason. So the reason that I'm doing this is because we can solve that problem, and we can also solve the supply chain ownership problem. And by doing both of those things together, we can stop basically letting the giant corporations drain value out of our economy, out of our, local social circles and larger too. The corporations that are the massive corporations like BlackRock, like what are they doing? Like they're just owning land so that we have to pay them because we don't own it. We've gotten tricked out of it, and we don't know how to do it on our own. So we're like, what the hell are we gonna do? And the banks know that, so they're like, well, just get a loan. That's no problem. Just get a mortgage. Then you just never get it paid off. And then if you finally pay it off, they just basically take it away from you when you die, and you can't really pass it on, And that's another reason that people want to put it in the trust. And by the way, again, I'm not saying that I'm right, and maybe we do need to put it in the trust, or just trick it out so that put it in the trust, take it out, or whatever it takes.
That you can't separate those things.
I don't know what else to cover. These are some of the reasons I think. So workers are kind of maybe the wrong thing to use. It's really the users that are gaining the ownership, but usually it's because you're working. You gain land ownership as you work. You also gain land ownership when you pay profit, but it's much smaller now. This is another reason to own, is that we can finally govern. We can actually have a say in, instead of just eating poisoned food, glyphosate all day long. We can actually finally get control of that and stop begging other owners to do the right thing. They're never going to do the right thing. And then you produce the surplus so that you can sell it for profit, so that you can pay all the external things that you can't yet pay for. Also, it's good for the earth because it should localize production and incentivize respect for the earth, since you own it. So you would more likely, want to protect what not maybe the greatest argument, because the owners already own it and they're not protecting, I guess, the land. So I'm not sure. But I think it should localize production. Okay.
There's a question there by Rather Mercurial. I don't know if you can read the chat.
See. Okay. As an alternative to the commitment pool style for the various resources in the system, do you think intents would be a more approachable interface? I notice that people can easily get overwhelmed by the token abstracted resource pools unless they are actually participating in the material and necessary value. Intents.
Yeah, I should have asked ahead of time. So are you familiar with like the intent and solver approach or architecture, I guess you'd call it, for DeFi systems nowadays?
I've heard of that, where you say your high level goal and it figures out how to get there. Is that what that is?
Yeah, exactly. And it's being used by Circle's, they call it a UBI. It's not really UBI, but the Circle's mutual credit protocol, which is actually super cool. Everyone has their own mutual credit token, and then they use solvers and intents to help people. Basically, if you have your own mutual credit and your credit network and you need to find a path to dollars, or some other asset, the solvers can help you do that. and yeah, they're just really flexible tools for solving abstract problems. And there are some cool networks being built around that to enable like new economic experiments and new value flows that aren't necessarily like trading tokens in DeFi, but solving more abstract challenges. So you could have, um, anything you could express as an intent. For instance, say you have. A vending machine representation of a land trust or an apartment building or a farm. Um, you know, you could have an intent of generating some profit that you can share among folks, who are maybe, earning some sort of profit share in the future by contributing in resources that the system wants, which could be money, right? So, it could issue, housing in exchange for money. You just have an intent. You need some money. You have all these things to offer in exchange for it, and then someone else has an intent. I need housing. I have this much to pay. And then you could have some solvers that live locally in the system or out there in the world, bringing those things together. Or you can do that on the human layer and just post an apartment for rent ad or whatever you need. But because they're so flexible, you don't have to pre-consider all of the tokens like you would in a commitment pool. Like I have to figure out like what are the specific things that I have to offer in this marketplace, and how do I present them in a way, and configure them in a way where I can participate in this economy. Now, if you're actually getting your bread and your housing and stuff like that from that system, you have an incentive to really participate and figure it out, and it's easier to use it as an abstract symbol. We're used to doing that. And there's an actual resource at stake there. So, I want to get the bread or the housing. I'm going to do this thing. That's done. Great. But when you're looking at it from the outset, it's really hard to kind of grok a commitment pool. That's why, Will does these awesome demonstrations where you put all your commitments in a hat and you do this together in person, because it really helps the point land home, which I recommend if you're ever at a conference where Will is. But it's still really hard to understand these systems, and the intents at least make that part easy. It's easy to sell your tokens on Metri when the app works. The DeFi part works great all the time. Maybe not their application, but it solves a huge, pun intended, amount of complexity in that interaction, and maybe that could also help communicate a little better what you have on offer here, because it is kind of like a magic box where you tell it what you need and it goes out and tries to solve that problem for you. But that is a useful conversational tool as long as you can trust the magic box. And a lot of the stuff is still nascent. Works really good for DeFi tokens, but I'll drop a link to Anoma. They're doing some cool stuff, but
I just recently
it's
found.
at least sorry, go ahead.
I just recently found them. Yeah, thank you for the Anoma link. And I see what you mean. I think about the intents, and I agree that that there's just too many moving parts in this for it to be very comfortable the way to. You don't have to like. I mean, like if we take it to the ultimate kind of absurdity, you'd have to pack around these paper tickets and make sure you have the right ones. And it's just aggravating and ridiculous. But so trying to put all that confusion in your head, and I agree. I've seen some of the Will's presentations on the YouTube about those baskets and stuff. And my understanding is that what the Sarafu is supposed to do is that you price the tickets in the local, for example, the shilling, I think they were used, and then by doing that, it abstracts all that away and turns it into what looks like another kind of money, but it's actually backed by those actual commitments. So I agree with you. It would be better to have less of the gory gears exposed and get a simple requests interface. Yeah.
I missed most of the last question. Something about ANOMA?
Rather Mercurial was talking about ANOMA as one of the places where you can read about things called intents, which are kind of a high level way of making requests to the system. So you'd be like, I have the intention of getting some sort of thing done, and then it figures out how that would happen and what would need to be put into the system in order for that to happen. I think is part of what that does. I think all of those high level things, that's part of what, again, this is too nerd, like computer nerd, but from my perspective, it looks kind of like, people don't want to look down at the command line tools. They want to be able to have clickable buttons and things that are simple. So you get rid of all the ugliness and make it so it's so simple that you almost can't make mistakes. And so I'm totally on board with your rather mercurial your comment is very well received. Thank you. Did that answer your question, Siri?
I guess.
Well,
I think in
maybe we're
terms of
stuck. Go on.
like for practical examples, it seems like a lot of like there's a lot of work going on in collective land ownership and like co-living and just even like awesome maker spaces, like Tibby's various experiments. A lot of the pieces exist, already, and you've kind of built on top of a lot of existing things.
Yeah.
So at least for those who like nerding out on those, Ron on the bread cooperative team, he's been traveling around Japan on a vending machine kick. And one thing he built was it's a simple system of tracking responsibilities inside of some sort of co-living arrangement, some shared space. And you come in, you put in a deposit, and people take care of their responsibilities. There's no chore wheel or anything. There's a chart of what needs to get done, and people do what needs to get done, and it kind of tracks the delta, between in the form of your balance, between like how much you have put into the system, like in terms of value, and how much you've taken out. Like, say, if you break something or shirk some duty, and someone has to cover for you or replace something. And the thing that you interact with is your chart of responsibilities, what you're getting and what you're committing, and your balance, essentially. So if you have if you have sufficient abstraction, right? That's what we all dream of, in any system. There's this magical abstraction layer. But if you are using, a more intent-centric system, hypothetically, because none of them are really production ready yet, really your challenge would be just tracking that delta. When somebody comes into the system, they're bringing in some sort of exogenous value, like their rent money or their work, or whatever they happen to be bringing, bringing in goods that people need, etc. Whatever the system is holding, it only really has to track someone's wallet balance, right? So you're consuming housing, that has a material cost, and that has an immaterial cost, like profit, right? You get some ownership out of that. But really you just have to issue tokens for that, for like the people's putting in net value, taking out net value from the system itself, rather than having to track all of the minutia inside of the system. You're only really tracking the surplus and the debits out of it, right? Which is what people actually need to see. And commitment pools are great, and it's not ideal, right? Because you have this really big complex system, and yeah, there's automated market makers to make it kind of easy to move from one resource to the other, or one commitment to some resource. But what people actually want and what makes it competitive in terms of like, hey, use this system as an alternative civic coordination tool, not capitalism, right? Is just being able to have a balance and use that balance to get what you need. And yeah, if you can focus on that, then at least more of your work is strategically oriented toward problem solving, right? Not dealing with the minutia of tracking every resource and as a token and dealing with a complex accounting system. It's more bookkeeping,
Yeah. Yeah, and a lot of that can be, and so that, so it just feels like more like the regular economy instead of being so explicit about every transaction. Yeah.
So what was this thing you were just describing called?
I don't know
Sorry, I was muted.
what you mean.
Sorry,
Thing that you
I
were
just
just
brought up.
talking about just now.
Easy.
Yeah, I'll grab you a couple of links. I had brought up intents and solvers as a potential approach to tracking all of the various, minute exchanges that happen within the system. But it's kind of an abstract concept. It's pretty popular in DeFi, being the idea being that you express an intent to you want to do some transaction, like you want some ether and you have some USDC. And then there are other programs called solvers that search those intents and they try to find, like the best transaction. They take a little cut, and it's a way of decentralized way of coordinating markets. But you don't have to use them for markets. You can use them for more abstract exchange. Yeah, so you don't have to use money, essentially. You can exchange things directly depending on coincidence of wants, or more complex exchange of values, like complex mutual exchange systems like circles also use the same architecture. So yeah, I'll drop some links in the chat for you.
And Keen was asking for the difference between those and commitments. I don't know if it is already clear or not, Keen.
Yeah, I think it's better to see the example that you just mentioned. Thank you.
So Patrick, like something I keep, sorry if I'm a bit stubborn, but something that I keep wondering is like, how can we prototype this, right? And I don't know if you thought about that, or yeah, like how do you imagine like the minimum smallest thing that we could do to test this
Mhm.
model? And
Mhm. Mhm. Well, I think it could be implemented as a Web3 app. Actually, had that partly done, but then what I was using, the system I was using, was partly taken offline. I think, even though it's presented as a mechanical device, the purpose of that, the reason that I did that is because I wanted to point out that even though Web3 has some advantages, it's not strictly necessary for us to move to a new economy. I think we can use just old printing press type technology to change the way that the instruments interact with each other. So how can we do this? So we can implement this on any chain. I did it partly on the chain called near.org, just because I don't know why. Some people I were working with chose that chain. It's pretty good. It's pretty low fee, and I don't really care what chain it's on. So the coin is already minted and is sitting on that chain. We just need an interface to essentially implement the buttons. Buttons are, I'll look at this old version of the button. So we just have to implement these buttons. Add land button is where you look on a real estate listing and you say, oh, this land is for sale at this price and it's this many square meters. And this causes the ECVM to begin the coin auction. Then, yeah. So if we just implemented these buttons, then we would be going. Does that make sense? These aren't really buttons, by the way. Some of these, I mean, these are though. So these are fairly complex, like vote by map, vote by calendar. This isn't the right wording. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, like
Let me know.
I'm even wondering like if something like as you are mentioning, like we don't need like any Web3 for this, right? So if I wanted to implement this like with a few friends, like, and I tell you I have some land to do that, like,
Yeah, the core of this doesn't need Web3. The coin mostly needs Web3 because that's what people believe in nowadays. But theoretically, you could even do the coin on paper notes, but it would require, I think, even more trust. So yeah, you guys, a group that already has land could start doing this. What you would do is you would me moved up. This is the kind of the first thing. Once you own the land, this is the first thing you do is you select the tickets that are going to be produced, and you do that by figuring out what goods you want to produce on the land. So you want to produce bread, honey. What are you going to make? And then you issue these tickets, and then you sign. You find out what contracts are required to fulfill the tickets, and you tell your friends, you're like, hey guys, sign one of these contracts and you're going to get a big bundle of tickets. This is the bundle of tickets idea is part of resolving the confusion that there's a certain amount of confusion that Rather Mercurial was mentioning with the commitment pools, where there's just a big pile of stuff in there and you're not really sure what's going on. If we can make some of that selection early, then it makes it better for planning production and what's going to happen. And then as you fulfill your contract, you would end up distributing ownership to your friends as deeds so that they could own their own portion. That's really the core of it. It's really just those things. Does that make sense?
yeah. So and who is doing the planning, like of what work needs to be done and so on?
Wait, could you say that again?
Who or how is the planning doing about like what work needs to be done?
Oh, okay. Well, when you select, so the way that I talk about this later is I talk about something as a basic outcome. And the basic outcome is a kind of a work auction where you end up offering all the jobs that are required to. Well, I mean, you try to figure out if a lot of the people in your area in your on your parcel are going to want, say, bread. You're like, okay, guys, we're gonna issue the tickets for bread, but bread requires contracts and deeds for each step in that production, right? For the farm, you need a contract. For the mill, for the bakery. Similarly, you need the deeds that own the land along the way. And so you're saying, how do we find out who does the work? What I think we would do is we would create these contracts and deeds which are backing these tickets, which we selected. Each group, by the way, the way I look at it is that the village would look like a group of groups, and not necessarily, like a lot of things not everyone in the village wants. Like maybe you're allergic to honey, so you don't want honey and all this stuff. So only the group that selected, for example, bread tickets, let's say it was just 20% of the people that's fine. You'd be like, well, here are the contracts that we need to make bread, and here are the list of deeds that we need to make bread. And then you find all the contracts for all the tickets for that basic outcome, and you say, okay, who wants to grow the wheat? Who wants to do the different things? Then if people sign up to do the work, then it's all easy. But if some of the contracts are left over because people don't want to do them, whatever, you have to do the cleaning or something. That's something people don't like to do usually. And what you do is you reduce the number of hours required in order to still receive the same basic outcome. In other words, you'd still get all the same amount of tickets, but you would have to do less work. Let's say, like 6 hours a day instead of 8 hours a day or something. And then all the rest and then that extra time would be redistributed to the other people that aren't taking on the job that is considered to be an unpopular job. Does this answer your question?
Yes, I think like, yeah, but partially, like, like there are so many details that about the work that needs to be done. I mean, you can like mention, like, make like general contracts, but there are activities that we might forget about in advance, right? Like, and then
I guess that's true, but that concern for detail is already true in capitalism. The current system, we also have to deal with that. So I don't think that that's something that we can't achieve. Okay. Well, I don't know what else to talk about. But this is actually also different. All right, this is just this. Okay, well, I don't know.
So do you have like what would you like to get? What type of support? I guess you would like to get some developers who can finish the work in near, or what is it?
Yeah, that'd be great if I could get some people to help me do the development. I worked on it for a while, and like I said, it got kind of broken, and I kind of gave up on it. Got disheartened, I guess. That'd be great if I even had just one developer to kind of do some of this with.
And is the how have you been funding your work developing this? And if someone wanted to do like that work, is there any reward, like any ticket or something that people participating would get, or?
Well, the way I look at it is that people should receive. We should use the system right up front in a kind of a meta way, I think. And the problem with that is that it doesn't look like it's worth anything to receive tickets, and tickets are certainly not redeemable at first. We haven't even produced anything. And then the deeds don't mean anything because we don't own any land yet. But yeah, we could definitely pay people with those 2 tokens. But it would take a lot of trust for people to think that would be valuable. Maybe even more trust than people that like to buy coins. Although the coin market is so saturated, I'm not so sure that's going to work either. So. And then I guess a final note on how to get this done. As far as it being an ECVM, being a vending machine, it would probably take a web app to do it realistically. But setting aside that and just making it look like a business, I think that it's really not that undoable. In fact, if a business that's already operating were just to use one part of this, if it were just to commit some of its profit to be an investment for the user who paid that profit into the land that would become that person's ownership eventually. If they were to do that profit sharing, it would actually cause profit to approach zero. That alone would be something that would start the ball rolling, just a profit sharing mechanism because the reason that works is because user ownership gets rid of profit. So when you turn profit into user ownership, it's like a negative feedback loop. It directly cancels out the profit. Anyway, that's obvious. Maybe I don't even know, but.
So sorry, how would that look like? Like a business sharing profit with consumers, I guess, with users.
No, it can't be you can't just share the money to the users.
Okay.
You have to actually, you would have to actually buy land, and you would have to, you'd have to accumulate a bunch of profit, maybe for a long time, in order to buy land without debt. And then you would vest ownership of that land to the people who paid that profit.
Okay.
Because by doing that, let's say you're somebody that buys bread from a business that was using this profit sharing. If you bought bread from them, you would be slowly gaining ownership in a farm. It doesn't, by the way, it's not usually not the farm that they're growing that current bread on. It would be a piece of land that they buy in the future. So what would happen is, as they gain ownership, they eventually don't pay profit because they own their bread before it's even grown. Does that make sense? That's why it cancels out profit in the long run, and returns control to the consumers, which is even more important.
So what would the incentive of the business owner be to do that?
Yeah. Well, quite a few businesses, especially very large businesses, they will treat some amount of profit in all kinds of kind of random ways, trying to sometimes make themselves look a little better, kind of like a PR strategy. They'll be like, well, we're going to give some profit to, charity, or we're going to give some to the workers, or we're going to give some, I don't know, they just make stuff up sometimes. So this could be a way for them to spend the money that they sometimes spend on so-called charity or whatever. They could directly be doing this in order to stabilize the economy for the people that are within that economy, at least. And so it looks, PR meaning public relations. So if the business is already going to be using some percentage of profits in some sort of noble way, this would be a very, I would say, very noble way, because it actually addresses profit head on by making it disappear.
Any experience pitching this idea to business owners?
Have I asked? Oh, no, I haven't done that, but
We should.
Okay. Okay. Well, maybe that's enough time. Thank you so much for having me on, unless you guys want to keep going.
I think just one thing that comes to mind is that you mentioned there's kind of a lot of parts to this, and there's potential that someone could adopt a system like this, even just one part of it, and get some benefit. It might help to more clearly understand what those various parts are, how, what actual modules exist, especially for those of us kind of navigating the decentralized space, or just alternative coordination tech in general. It's kind of hard to, especially with the more progressive side of things, it's hard to kind of understand how we might actually make a stack out of all these various primitives that exist. And a large part of that is because a lot of these systems are silos. Like, people have big giant problems to solve, and oftentimes solutions that people build, they're quite monolithic, and oftentimes a monolithic system has to be perfect, right? Otherwise it doesn't serve anyone. But if things are a little more clearly modularized, then it at least helps folks understand how they can practically adopt something and integrate it, because people come from all sorts of different situations. A lot of people are going to have existing systems in place that they need to bring into whatever software you're providing, or that they're using it alongside of. And some folks are new and they need some more structure. So it's a balance that it's hard to communicate across. So understanding at least what the various pieces are and how they're useful individually and how they work together could help a lot in just understanding the whole system in general,
Yeah, thank you. I agree. I will try to make it more modular, and maybe even write a single document for each module so that we can get them separated and understood more in isolation. Thank you.
So thanks a lot. I don't know, Leo or Jesu. Hola, hola. If you have some final comment, I feel Patrick wants to finalize already.
Yeah, thanks for presenting, Patrick. I also have to say transparently, I'm still trying to properly grasp what it is, but it is interesting for sure.
Thank you.
Jesus, I don't know if you spoke yet, and you might be the Jesus who I know, so this is exciting to see you here. Jesus, if you're there, feel free to unmute if you want to. So I guess one question that I was wondering is like, what would be the different scenarios that you think of where it could be started in terms of like existing ownership models? Like, okay, let's say there's a small neighborhood. Let's say it's 100 houses who all say, okay, yeah, this is interesting. Like, and could this only be implemented if there's a current renting structure? I'm sorry if these are like oblivious questions, but and like, how do you see it potentially starting? Like, would it be starting from the current renters or the current landlords? I mean, yeah, the ownership structure would change, so obviously everybody would be involved. But or can you only see it from before a new building is being built? Yeah, what do you think? Or do those questions even make sense? I don't know.
I've thought about it different. I think we can have many different approaches, and there's a chance it could work, like you're mentioning, inside of a neighborhood. But how I usually think about it and usually write about it is, have you heard of what they call private cities? There's quite a few billionaires that are attempting to create private cities. There's one in Sonoma County that's trying to be built called California Forever. But anyway, there's a lot of them. And the idea with a private city is that you would buy land outside of city limits. Usually kind of like often it would be kind of desert land or farmland or something that's not developed at all. And then you would buy that without debt, hopefully without debt, though you could still make it work with debt. You just have to produce more surplus and get that done. But so the vision I have is that it would be quite a big bite, it's quite a big undertaking to get involved in trying to create a private city. The scale, I think, can be far less than something like California Forever. I think is around 100 square miles, which is, I think, way more than we need. What am I trying to say? Oh, so at first it could be pretty rough. The people that are going to go on it first on day one are going to be kind of people that can live in tents for a while, not in tents, by the way, in tents. You can kind of rough it, and you can do the agricultural work and other things that it's going to take to get I said agriculture, I really mean permaculture, though, like bringing in food-bearing trees and other things that or pioneer species that maybe you can't use but are used for shade, so we can establish more. I don't know a lot of the details of that. I know a little bit, but there are people that understand the ecological part more than I do. And then we can use ancient building techniques to show that we can live there without needing huge amounts of electricity. We can have stable temperatures inside their shelters without too much effort by building slightly underground and all these things. It's really old stuff. I don't know if I answered your question, though. What I was trying to say is that I'm a little bit against what I'm saying, too, because like to go outside of city and build a private city is like, oh boy, really? You think you're going to do that? That's really a big leap. But if we don't do that, then it's almost harder to be building inside of a city where it's just so difficult. You really can't have much permaculture going on because there's so many rules about things, and it's almost harder because if you go outside of city limits, you can buy some amount of acreage for a more reasonable amount of money. Does that answer some of your question?
A little bit, yeah, it makes sense. So basically, you're saying it would be nice to start from land that's fully owned, as the group fully owns the land, and then maybe decides to build buildings on it.
Yeah, it would be. There's some guys that do things called large-scale ecosystem restoration, where you can turn a desert into productive. Like Rather Mercurial is pointing out in the chat, the developments that are attempting to do this right now, such as the 100 square mile California Forever project, is he's writing out they're doing panopticon surveillance and drone factories and weapons and oh my god, so it's easy to do it wrong. And so I'm trying to be very open-ended about this, that I just think that it's almost becoming popular to create private cities, at least it's because I've been looking into it, so now it's popular in my mind, I guess. But there's actually a very much older, in the late 50s, down above LA, called a California City, which is kind of almost a non-name. So it's California City. It's 200 and something, a little over 200 square miles, so about twice the size. It's kind of been abandoned and wasn't really fully built out. Has a lot of looks kind of like a ghost city, and I'm bringing that up just to let you know that I think this could also fail, because like it's already, people have been trying to do this kind of stuff for a long time, and it's really very very difficult to do. I think our approach, where people get real ownership from working and they don't just end up having to pay rent for eternity, I think will make a difference, but it's not the only thing. And so appreciate the question.
It's cool you bring up the California Forever site. I live nearby, share a watershed with the project, and it's like I think a lot of people don't really like, they talk about the politics and the network state stuff and like the potential outcomes, but really gloss over like what is actually happening now in places like Honduras, or even in they got to be more mask on when doing a project in Northern California, right? But even still, the way they're acquiring this land is, sometimes they're buying the land, right? But a lot of these people don't want to sell. These are generational ranches, and places that these people really steward and care about. And this is the fourth time someone's been trying to make a billionaire city. Going back to the 1800s is a long history of people wanting to do just this in that spot. And the last time was the 1970s, and they a lot of the same people are still alive who set up a land trust and set up an intentional development plan for Solano County that was really informed by the needs of the land and the needs of the people, to focus development into the populated areas where people do need affordable housing, and to set up frameworks to like really require that development suits the needs of the place. And of course, the developers always want to work around those laws and standards, and just build these giant suburban tracts or these billionaire private cities, and buy the Air Force Base, turn it into their own little microstate. And a lot of times they're just bullying people off their land. They'll sue folks for market manipulation or something like that, for turning the purchases down, because they'll make an offer, right, and then people will turn them down because it's their home. And then they'll sue them for half. I think the biggest one, there were
Whoa.
$50 million suits, and it's like $50 million lawsuit, right? You can't do anything about that, but they'll happily settle, right, for paying you, for your land. And so people just get, they can't afford the lawyers. What are they going to do? So they end up having to sell. And then, a lot of those folks have really bad outcomes, and they're not acquiring the land. They are acquiring it legally, if you consider lawfare legal. But I mean, certainly they're not acquiring it in good faith. There's a real impact, especially environmentally too. But the folks in Solano County, they actually have a lot of experience. I'll dig up some of the laws that they got passed, and share them along in the chat in the coordinations channel. But it's a really interesting example of these folks who are very there's not a whole lot of education in Solano, except where people go off and then work for industry and then come back and then live on the family farm when they're older. Otherwise it's just agricultural education, right? So people don't know about a lot of tools, but they're really trying to fight the California Forever project. And it's sad to see that in our space, where people care about network state, the network state, and they, in a negative way, they don't want to see them. We don't really do a whole lot to support these actual communities in these places and really see what they're doing to carry on that fight. And it's tools like this that could give people a leg up, because even these, they're smart when it comes to farming, but they're not really smart when it comes to, systems or coordination or land trusts and that kind of stuff. they really are the kind of folks who will adopt a solution, who will work hard to build culture and knowledge around their practices and steward the land and the system together. But what they need is like accessible knowledge that these alternatives exist, and they need things that they can actually use today. So we have a lot of catch up in our space to do to help meet people where they are, because the tyrannical parts of our space, the network state people, they're already out there working in place. And we're still trying to even articulate what
Mhm.
is possible in the pro-social side and in the collective side. So I appreciate all the work, folks like you are doing, and, lots of folks in this chat. It's a big battle, but it's one we're unfortunately on the back foot on, and it's moving really fast.
Mhm. Yeah, I agree. I think it's that's part of the reason I did the business model version of this, is to be um, a little less of the hippie approach, a little less of the, like, we want to do good, but if we're only doing good and we're not paying the piper, as it were, or the banker, or what do you want to say, if we don't not if what I'm trying to say is, if we can attract the so-called capital by looking a little bit more ruthless, that's what they expect, then maybe we can achieve some of the goals, like you're mentioning. I think you mentioned the Prospera guys. It doesn't really matter whether you did or didn't, I guess, but any of these billionaires that are, those guys might be different anyway, but there's a lot of approaches to this that are, like you're saying, they're getting going, and they're, but in the case of like the ones up in your area, it could be that they're doing very bad things, and that what I was trying to say there is, I'm just trying to bring the two worlds together. The world of, we're trying to do the right thing, we're trying to be a refi, but the DeFi guys are getting all the cash. So if we can get a little bit more in the middle and look a little bit more DeFi, even though secretly we're refi, maybe we can get there.
Interesting, good thought. But what does that mean in this case? In what way would it be DeFi, or in general? What's the financial flow? I mean, and I'm sorry, just for clarity, and I'm sorry to be so ignorant, but I have not really read much. I'm one of those annoying people in Web3 who don't read, but I'm making progress if I'm asking. So that's my approach. At least instead of for years and years not reading and not asking, I'm at least asking and not reading.
Yeah, I appreciate the question, actually, because it's not it's not a sealed deal. Part of the attraction, I think we can be, part of the attraction in the case of the ECVM is the coin, and it's a number, playing the number go up game. So, the whales or whoever these big buyers are, that we can let them. In fact, I used to sometimes, I never really wrote it like this, but I think of the coin as krill, because we're going to feed it to the whales. And the reason that it's safe to feed to the whales without worrying about them buying too much or paying too much is that we don't give them any governance control. We don't give them any sort of ownership. Those coins have no redeemable value. They're just completely just numbers, just like Bitcoin. There's no value to them. But they're only a proof of scarcity. And the proof of scarcity for this coin is the number of square meters of land held under the terms of those other three documents, the tickets and the title. The ticket, the deed, and the bond or contract. So what is the DeFi approach? So the DeFi, for the coin, it's play number go up. That's it. But even if we take the coin out of it, I think the take the coin out of it. There's also, that's not what I want to share. There's also the oh, sorry, I lost my place. There's also real returns, very traditional financial returns that we can take advantage of to attract regular DeFi. In other words, anyone like a venture capitalist or a so-called Shark Tank kind of guy who wants just regular returns, we can, the value proposition for the financial investors is that they have potentially very high profit margins because our internal monetary costs are very close to zero and eventually can actually hit zero. So instead of, the typical approach with a community like this is that people would always be struggling to pay the rent and pay and buy all this stuff at the farmer's market, and there's just so much money needed to get all this stuff done, and it's just so hard on people, and it just never gets done. So the DeFi attraction here, I'm claiming, is that there's actually very high profit margins to be had in this system.
Okay. Then where does that come from? Like I want to understand.
Yeah. Okay. So like, let's just envision, we go outside of city limits and we buy some land. Let's say we go buy some land from those Solana guys. We buy it back from the California guys, whatever, it doesn't matter. I'm just saying. And we start producing, we start installing permaculture on there. So we have, fruit bearing trees and nut bearing trees and avocados, and I don't know, not everything grows everywhere, but I'm just saying you can have high value trees. And so for the first few years, in fact, for trees, it may be even 5 or 10 years, you don't have many returns. But we can also plant annuals and things, and so we can be selling, berries and tomatoes and the stuff that is typical farmer market type stuff. The point is that we're going to be very intend to be very productive on that land. So we'll be creating surplus. We'll be creating enough to eat for ourselves, and then we'll also must be creating a surplus to pay back to financial investors and for other reasons.
Okay, thank you. So that's part of the system, is the selling of the produce, of the food that's produced on the land.
Yeah, and also we can also rent once we have structures built in excess of the structures we need to live. We can also rent out. One way I think of this is that on day one we might arrive there with really big tents and the things that we're going to use for the cafeteria lunches and just sleep in as we build the real structures. And then we would build a big centralized structure for our, so we could start having almost like a hotel setting or something where we could, apartments or something. And then we could start building our individual homes out far away from the center. And once we have extra housing, we can rent that out to people as, the tourists. So we could sell tickets or whatever so people could come in to stay there and, have dinner and all kinds of, attract very rich people. The people that are rich sometimes like to overpay for stuff anyway, so we can really charge a lot.
Okay, yeah. And a few minutes ago, a while back, you said, I remember you saying, maybe I misheard, or maybe you misspoke, but I remember you saying people becoming part owner without even paying rent. Did I hear that correctly, or no?
Yeah, I envision the workers that go on there on the land would never pay rent. What they would do, in fact, a lot of workers right now who are willing to work have massive amounts of debt too. So I have another plan to how to fix that part of it. But we would never charge them rent. They would never need any money if they were willing to just do it like this. Is that they would have access to the place that which would become the land where they would build their house. There wouldn't be a house there yet, but they could pitch a tent or whatever. And they wouldn't own that land yet either. But as they fulfill their contract, I think we could even vest micro amounts daily. And again, wouldn't have to be legally binding micro amounts, but internally it would be legally binding. So we'd say, oh, look, you gained, some square meters because you did 1 day of work or whatever. What I'm trying, and then, so then.
So basically, basically you're skipping the middle step of renting, and instead of them getting a voucher for the rent, they are getting a voucher for a piece ownership.
Yes.
In return for their work as the workers. Like conceptually, I don't know, like legally, but like conceptually, that's what you envision.
Yeah, they get land ownership because they are completing their contract. And by the way, even before that, before they do any work on day one, I actually think that we need to be able to give them tickets that they can redeem on day one for. And the way that they get the tickets is by signing the contract. So you sign the contract, you get these tickets, and then on day one you show up and maybe you need a shower because you haven't showered in a month, and you get cleaned up and you eat and you rest, and then on the next day we start work, or whatever it takes, And some people, we're going to try to address everyone eventually, but some people can't really work. They've been homeless too long, and they have a lot of issues, and so we want to onboard them, but that's a little slower, and we need people that can work, and then but those people that are working don't ever need money. I think that's one way of saying that.
Yeah, okay, interesting. So yeah, the contract would never give money. The contract would always give ownership vouchers or and other use vouchers of food or whatever. Or voucher / credit clearing / commitment pool, whatever model works best.
Yeah, but I do want to stress I do want to make a clarification just for real. Okay. So, for example, there's something called WWOOF, which is the Worldwide Organization of Organic Farmers. And I went and did some of that work just to see what it was like. And basically, you show up and you work for usually like half a day. And so when you work, instead of paying rent and getting paid for work, you just don't get paid and you don't pay rent. So those things cancel each other out. That's on the surface sounds similar to what we're proposing with Earth Change, but it's actually not, because with that system, with WWOOF and other similar work labor, I don't know what they call them, some sort of work sharing or something, you don't ever gain ownership. So you're essentially you're not really a slave, but you have to work because you don't own. And what the Earth Change is, one of the really crucial things is that you are gaining ownership of land as you work. And it can't just be ownership of the outputs of the land, it has to be land. And so by doing that, we're able to finally stop the flow of rent.
Yeah, thanks for stressing that. That is indeed a very important distinction. And with that, I don't know if that exists currently, right? Like I've not heard of that. That's where people get ownership. There is, of course, still the question, like, in what way is it a win-win model? And I mean, does it have to be a win-win model? Not necessarily, but in our current society, of course, win-win always sounds nice. And there's a whole nother dissertation about win-win and where that comes from and why and all of that. Actually, very interesting thoughts on that in the book that I'm currently reading called Winners. What is it called? Winners Take All. Anyhow, right. So from a win-win perspective, like, in what way is that becoming interesting to landowners? Right, is a really interesting question. And that question only arises if you don't start with a group-owned thing. If you start with a group-owned thing, then in theory, that question might be a lot easier because you don't have to convince one or two landowners if you buy it as a group that already wants to do this.
Or you're asking why would the owners choose to do this? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Yeah, I think
If
you
you start,
understood it.
so
If you start from scratch with the rules already set up like they are, like we were declaring them, I guess, then everything's fine because nobody gets confused. But if you, I think, I'm trying to ask if this is what you're saying. I think so. If there's already an established community and then you try to go in with this idea, then it would probably met with resistance. Is that what you're saying?
Basically, yeah. Well, okay. So the scenario I'm thinking is even let's just take one house with 10 apartments owned by one owner and 10 different groups, 10 different parties, or I don't know if that's the correct English word, but yeah, 10 different parties are renting 10 different apartments from the one landowner. Is there any way to make sense of the landowner switching to this model without selling the whole thing to a new group that wants to do this?
I don't think that it really helps the owner. I mean, it would make it so that if the owner wants community and wants people to be able to live there, then it would make that work. But it would make it so he doesn't get rent from them. So that.
Okay, so actually, there is at least one scenario which would be a which does exist. The scenario, right, is the owner is like the house is already paid off. Owner doesn't have children. Owner's getting old. Owner's thinking about what to do with the house, and instead of figuring out who to inherit it to, he could slowly give the ownership over to the existing renters. And especially this makes sense if he already likes the existing group of people and there's some existing relationship. And yeah, so that in that scenario, I could potentially see it.
Yeah, it doesn't. There's a lot of conflict with the current system in that regard. So people will just kind of look at you like, why the hell would I do that? That's just ridiculous. By the way, the reason I want to come back to the reason for this is it's not something I just made up. It comes from the GNU GPL. So the GPL is saying that the users need to get ownership of the sources, and if land is the ultimate physical source, then that's the reason for all of this. This is the reason this is all being attempted. And in the free software, or the world of so-called open source, I say it like that because Stallman would be mad if I said that he's associated with open source, but he calls it free software. But it's essentially the same thing. And the point being made is that a lot of people don't like the GNU GPL because it doesn't let you become kind of a virtual landlord in a way. Like with most of the other licenses like the BSD and Apache, or if you're just public domain, you can take that code and then build proprietary products on top of it, or you can I'm trying to be. It's just that it gives you too much control over the users, so that you can kind of overcharge them and spy on them and do other kind of bad things. So the GNU GPL says, well, if you give it to someone, you also have to give them the sources, but that conflicts with the kind of landlord mentality of having ultimate control.
Very interesting. So this software license, GNU GPL, is that what it's called?
Yeah, it's 6 letters, GNU and then GPL.
So that says if you give someone access to your software, you also have to give them like access to use it. You also have to give them the full source code.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And it doesn't say that you have to give away the source code to everyone, by the way. And that sometimes people don't know that. And it's really a big difference because it means you can actually charge people for the new improvements you're making along the way and only give the source code to the people you give to the binaries to. And Dahlman actually was selling copies of Emacs in the GNU compiler collection back when he created this license. So it's not that you can't charge money for it. It's not actually what's the difference is. The difference is that as you give people the sources, they have the ability to work around you and just start ignoring you if they want to. And landlords don't like that. I'm not trying to be mean about landlords. I just use that as an example because that's what we were talking about originally.
Yeah, I also do want to share like just from my perspective, and like I don't know if I'm whatever politics. I'm not really. Yeah, I guess my point is it's like in our current world, like it's a being a landlord and having rent is like also has many advantages. But yeah, I mean, and for both sides. But is it ideal? No, not really. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah. In a money world, it is a pretty functional thing. But in a general world that we would like to see, I don't know if it's not.
The way I look at it is, again, I think that the landlording will actually continue, and I think that this sounds like I must be losing my mind to say this, but I think that we actually need to encourage a little bit of landlording inside of the system. Now, that sounds crazy, but what I'm meaning is that, if we have extra structures that we can rent out, and if we have extra produce to sell, that we should charge as much as we can, and so that people will pay the profit that we need to do the things that we need to do. And also, but this is the final thing about the profit and the landlord and all that, is that the people that are paying those values, that they need to also slowly be gaining ownership of the land required to make it so that in the future they don't have to buy those things necessarily. So that if they are in a, people that are going to be coming in as tourists, they're not going to be hurting for money. We want them to be rich, I think, in my opinion. So I think we can play both sides of the game. It makes us seem like we're hypocrites maybe, but I think it's fine. Just so we're careful with our wording, we can be both DeFi and refi at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, sounds great. The question is just how. But so just for clarity, so with the software, the licenses for all the users, they also need to get the software. Of course, like digital ownership is a little different from physical ownership. If you have the like sharing ownership of the digital source code, quote unquote, is a bit easier than sharing the ownership of a land, perhaps, because you can't really duplicate the land as easily. And with a digital source code, you could make the argument, even if you duplicate it, both people could still have the full ownership, maybe. I don't know. That could be an argument that with land, that's not really that possible. So, but are you making the distinction that only the workers and not the users, or even are you making that distinction in land use in a group ECVM land project? Are you making the distinction that workers need to get part of the ownership, but users, quote unquote, not necessarily, or yeah, what do you think?
I may have written it wrong, and I've written it in the wrong way before. So if I did, I'm sorry. But what the point is that anyone that's a user of anything in the system is supposed to get ownership of the sources for that thing. So if you're a worker if you selected bread tickets, then you should get ownership in the farm and the mill and the bakery. Or if you're someone from the outside that bought either surplus tickets or surplus bread, either way, and you'll eventually redeem the ticket for bread. In that case, you're also a user, so you should also gain land ownership required to host usually another build out of another farm and another mill and another bakery. So you can gain ownership in the system in at least two obvious ways. One is by fulfilling the contract or bond. Sometimes we call it bond or sometimes contract. For the work, as you do that, you gain deeds. Or if you're coming in as someone outside of the system that's just buying surplus products, whether in the form of the final product or in the form of a ticket, then some amount of the profit you paid is required to be used as an investment for you to buy, for the system to buy even more land or reallocate that land to you so that you can gain the ownership you need, the sources you need, the physical sources, the material sources, which are primarily land, yeah.
Okay. And so is there in your scenario of thinking, is there the case that someone could come in and who just wants to live there but not work on the land, not contribute to that? Like does that exist in the concept?
Yeah. I'm sure you weren't talking about this when you said it, but I want to point out some of the ones that aren't so obvious, like babies don't work, but they need to be users, and people that are very old or have, major physical problems. There's going to be quite a few people that are not able to necessarily work, and also the people probably you were talking about who are the rich people that pay profits, so they gain some ownership. I'm actually a little bit worried about that. And so the way it's written right now is that the amount of profit that you have to dedicate to this is right now it's written in the document as any amount above zero. So it could be so infinitesimally small that they never really gain much of ownership. If we ends up turning out that they end up causing us trouble because they're over purchasing in order to gain ownership, I guess, or something. But yeah, there will be a certain amount of people that are living on the land that don't work because of various reasons. Yeah.
One thing I'm kind of wondering is like the scope of this. Like, so, say I'm it's 9 years from now we're at the other side of the real estate bubble, and a bunch of friends and colleagues and I are gonna buy a subdivision site that got abandoned or something, right? We're gonna build some stuff. And maybe some people who own the property next door, we know them, and we want to all pool our resources, some real world scenario. If I was entering into that situation as someone who's contributing into this, I would probably be the only nerd. Maybe there's like one other person, maybe two if you're lucky, who really cares about thinking about cooperative ways of owning things and the systems that go into them. And the task in front of me would be to identify the most appropriate vehicle to get this done. In the moment when we're trying to buy some land. So how do I actually get like a good legal framework to work with? How do I contact the right people who know how to work within that, get me what I need? And like, how do I implement a system to, in this case, assure us that we can have some sort of programmable property regime that we want? There's there's just going to be a few things that I really care about, and I want to make sure that whatever I'm using, I can clearly explain to the other stakeholders involved, so we can have shared understanding around how the system works, what it does. And if the system does everything, I'm never going to be able to do that. And it's going to be unlikely that the affordances of that monolithic system are just ones that work with all the parties involved, right? Especially when we talk about collective ownership, and potentially diverse interests and diverse types of stakeholders. So, it becomes pretty difficult to think of like how would I actually get a system like this deployed into the real world, right? So I think if knowing the scope of what you're trying to do, what the system is supposed to be doing, what functions it's performing, what functions it's not performing, more importantly, then I can have a better idea of like where it's actually useful in my workflow and our limited mental bandwidth as people trying to do something collectively. Then that would really help. Because at the moment it seems like the scope is really broad, and that basically means that everybody needs to change their behavior in order to comply with the complicated structure of the system that they're using, rather than using a system that adapts to their own behavior. So, yeah, being able to understand the boundaries of that system and compose it alongside all of the rest of the things that we're trying to do as people working on things in place, that becomes super important. So I think that might help a lot with communications, is just like what knowing what the actual primitives are, what functions they perform, and what specifically this system does, that what it doesn't do. So you can describe it without having to have people understand the entire philosophy behind it.
Okay. That sounds good. I think it sounds like a little bit of a continuation of your proposal to, and I agree with this idea that it should be broken into modules so we can just take parts of it. Even just during the learning of it, we can just take parts of it to understand just parts of it. And I think, and it actually is kind of parallelizable that way, as far as, even though it has a lot of connectivity, each component connects to the other components to some degree. I think we can chop it up a lot more, and I'll have to understand. I'll try to think about what that means to say what it's not. So whatever that means, I'll try to figure that out. Thank you.
Well, it's I think figuring out what it's not, yes, but also figuring out like not just what the concept is not, but just what areas of collective living it does not influence. I guess it's just a different way of phrasing it, but
Yeah. Could you give me an example, maybe? I'm not really.
So, for instance, is every dollar that's being used or whatever currency in? So, okay, let's say, yeah, this is a specific region, a specific piece of land. 10 people decide to live there, use the system. Does that then mean that each dollar that these people, or like that's yeah, I know that you don't, I mean, it's not about money because you're cutting out the money, but so but okay, but let's say there's one remote worker. Does it mean that all of the money involved in the remote work, it goes through the system? For instance, that's one specific question. Where I think the answer would be important and helpful to know.
Oh, I think I see what you're saying. So you're asking. Well, I'll tell you what I think is an answer to what you're asking. Is that the money that is collected from sales of surplus is not something that the ECVM deals with directly. So ECVM never owns any products that it can sell, and it doesn't sell products for the people. So the people that own, each individual owner and also each individual co-owner, which are two different things, they can sell whatever extra bread or extra honey. And each individual makes that choice. Like, if you want to eat 10 pounds of honey a day, that's your business, and nobody can claim that that's surplus if that's what you want to do. So nobody's telling you what to do. The ECVM doesn't, and the profit that you receive from that is not monitored by the ECVM, and the ECVM has no access to any of that. So it's all just individuals and or co-owners that are selling the product and then using those profits to do the various things they need to do, like pay taxes and pay fees and go to the dentist and other things until we get all that worked out. Did that answer your question?
Yes, that helped. Thank you. Yeah, for me, that definitely helped with increasing my understanding. Rather, Mercurial, did that go in a similar direction of what you were asking? Is that helpful? If you're there,
I
rather.
think I get the general principle. Yeah.
Was my question in that direction of what you were asking, like what the system is not? Or maybe I also misunderstood. Yeah.
No, I kind of like, yeah, I vibe with the point of your question. Like, it would be good to understand like what aspects of life in this system really aren't affected by the system at all, and what aspects of life are regulated by the system. Like kind of both from a practical standpoint of like how would I actually use this, and just from like a being able to understand it just by the description.
Yeah,
Yeah.
actually, something that I was thinking is like something like a user story. I don't know if you already did something like that. You know, like, hey, this is Bob, and he participates in this system and how life looks from his point of view, right? I think that something like that would be interesting.
Oh yeah, I see what you're saying. The flow of how it would look as you make the transactions and move through the system.
Exactly.
These are great ideas, guys. I'm gonna make sure I do the modularization and the user story. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, I would say something like that, right?
Yeah, user story or user journey, I would say, are two different things. User story is
Journey.
about the persona, and
Okay, journey.
and like what does the experience mean for the user's life? I mean, speaking from a tech language, of course, like user is not really the right word here, but yeah, we're just going from a software first standpoint because you're a developer and rather as a developer, and so well, we're just going with it. And so yeah, like user, yeah, I would say that's a user story. Like, what's the impact on someone's life, and like why do they come to this thing to use it, and what does it do in their life? And then user journey is like, while you use it, what are the exact steps that you go through as a user?
Oh, okay.
And also one other thought is, I think like a fruitful first touching point is like existing land related co-ops, if like they're already somewhat interested in doing something somewhat in this direction, right? And what if they they could have land already. I mean, some of them, yeah. Obviously, some of like actual food producing farmer co-ops or something have land. If you are a worker in that co-op, maybe there's interest from the existing landowners. Maybe it's not for living, but to then transfer land ownership gradually to the people working it, which then might increase the likelihood of the land co-op surviving longer and longer into the future. Like that could maybe be an approach It's not really about living, though. But I mean, maybe you could make it about living as well. But this would be more about farmland. But I mean, depends.
Yeah.
Every co-op owns different type of land. But I could see that potentially, you could find some interest there.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's a tricky road when you start talking about transferring the ownership. I mean, like, there are some people that would be willing to do that, so that could work. And I think also another thing to point out, and this maybe is part of what it's not. So during the allocation of that land, so when you work to own, usually in the Earth Change system, it would be very common when you're working to own that you would be gaining ownership in that exact village, but that's not required. The other thing is when you're paying profit and gaining ownership from paying profit, almost never would you be gaining ownership of that exact village. Usually the people in that village wouldn't be selling any of their land to the outsiders. That the land that you would be gaining as you paid profit would be usually for another parcel that hasn't even been purchased yet. And by the way, as the person with the deeds that are issued to you, which again might be a very tiny amount, but even so, you could select anywhere in the world to allocate those deeds. Potentially, as long as you could add that land to the ECVM, and the ECVM could get ownership of that land. And in that case, it's because you're paying profit, you get ownership. Yeah.
Wait. Okay. Yeah, that for sure. I agree. Like, yeah, detaching that from the direct land where you work, it could make sense. But so you're saying the EVCM or ECVM would be the owner?
ECVM temporarily holds the land as it's purchased. In the ECVM's case, often it's purchased theoretically by selling the coin, right? And it would just hold that land just so it would use some sort of legal entity like a trust or whatever to keep a hold of that land without really doing anything with it itself. It would just hold it so that it could slowly vest ownership to the workers and or in the case of if land was purchased for the people that were paying profit, in that case it would vest to those users. So the ECVM needs to be able to hold the land using a legal entity, but it only does that in a temporary fashion just for the fact that it needs to buy the land all at once without debt and then slowly vest it to the people that are adding value to the system.
I mean, doesn't that kind of limit you to just people who want kind of one ownership regime for their property? Like, I don't know. It seems like if I have to deal with a system that does a whole lot of stuff, that is a really specific assumption to have to accept, or opinion to have to accept, in order to, for instance, manage ownership shares relative to capital contributions or something like that. It's not going to be. It's going to limit you to just a very specific audience, right? Maybe just a few people who want to do it that specific way, and awesome, the system is great for them. But chances are that those stars aren't going to align very, very often. People for whom this system is useful, and also people who want that particular property regime. Whereas, there's a lot of ways that people might want to hold ownership in their land. Obviously, that's why there's lots of these structures, and there are like a lot of very offline versions of this.
Welcome
right,
to a
where
new season
there's
of the Green Pill Podcast.
there's like community land trust foundations almost, where they act as kind of the intermediary, and sometimes they help with like providing
Welcome
liquidity
to a
and
new
stuff,
season of the Green Pill.
to be able to transition land into a particular entity, which then transitions it later into its final land trust model. So you can kind of you can start your thing up all at once rather than going through the many year-long process of actually forming a functional land trust. So there are kind of transitional models like that, but they all kind of require you to do things their particular way, which is totally okay for like an offline model, because they do it that way because they have people there to help you, and they have funding, and they have other resources. But for a more peer-to-peer kind of environment, that's probably not going to be the case, and people probably want to have different opinions about like even like the granularity of what ownership means to them. Like obviously you're sharing a parcel of land in different ways, right? So you need some guarantee that people aren't going to destroy the land, right? So that has to be, that abusus domain of property has to be, controlled and not given to people, except as needed. They need to be held accountable for that. And then you're also dealing with the ability to profit from that land and to use it, etc. But then there's like the dimension of legal ownership and like economic interest and that kind of stuff, which people might want to consider in different ways. So yeah, like being able to approach that in layers might be kind of helpful. Just in being able to solve people's actual needs, but also being able to chunk it down to just what matters to someone, so they can understand that, okay, I have this particular problem to solve. We have 6 people. We want to buy a plot of land. We're going to build or use build houses or use the ones that are here or whatever. We're going to do our thing. We're going to farm together, whatever people want to do, on their land together. I'm at this stage of my experience doing that. These are the things I want to do. What pieces of this can I pick up and actually use to solve a problem? Then it might help people to orient themselves, at least conceptually, around what the system can do, and also like what people are trying to build, right? To help work with other people on something and share a vision.
Okay. I think I understood what you were saying. So I'm not sure, but I'll try to answer. So the ECVM would only hold land temporarily and would only have impose its restrictions during that time. Once you gain, in fact, even as you gain ownership, any amount of ownership you have at any point in time, the ECVM cannot take it back, and you can sell that land and you can take it out from the terms of operation even, and then leave the system, even if you're like sitting in the middle of the city, I think, which by the way, I think is potentially very dangerous too. So I don't really know how to fix that other than putting it into a trust. Maybe that's part of what you're saying is that, look, we need some of this, and so quit telling me what to do. And you're most likely right. I'm trying to make the system so lean that and have so little control down the road that I can't cause any of. I don't want it to be able to restrict people that way too much, or really at all. It's just the only thing I want it to do is just to achieve the goals that the GPL has, but in the material world. So besides componentizing or modularizing the system, the only other thing to solve, I think what you're saying maybe, is that the ECVM only wants to hold the land temporarily, and it only imposes the rules during that time. And then once you own it, you can, form trusts between yourselves and own the land in all kinds of various ways when you're owning it together, and that wouldn't be stopped. And maybe this is part of what it doesn't do too. So I appreciate your feedback. Let me know if that didn't really answer your question, though.
Oh yeah, I was kind of rambling. My apologies. I was thinking more about like the boundaries of the system itself. Like, there's some assumptions or potentially innovations to use or make in there around how a system like this can interact with like property ownership. There's been some cool experiments and proofs of concept, also some terrible ones. And I think just being able to understand that part, and the context of like what this system affords in that department, where I need a system to help me with property ownership, in this collective context or whatever it happens to be, then it might help a lot more to understand the system itself, just to be able to frame it in reality in some way. I think is what I was getting at, because then it would be easier to understand, like, objectively the properties and qualities of the system and what it affords to me and what restrictions I have to accept in order to use it effectively.
Okay. Well, I wonder if some of those approaches you're thinking of are things like Henry George land value tax, or so-called what is the Harburger tax. Or, oh yeah, where there's some sort of the Harburger tax where your land gets assessed probably yearly, and then if you won't pay the tax, then they auction it off or something pretty drastic. I don't like that approach. I don't like Henry George's approach either. Even I think he made a good analysis, but the idea that we're going to give all the money to the government and just hope for the best, I don't think that's going to work either. I don't know.
Yeah, I really hope the optimal model is one we haven't found yet.
Yeah.
There's a lot of them that sound bad, but yeah, I think like just being able to understand like what is the substrate or container, what can we call that, as a place for us to share ownership of something like land, and experiment with it, is a pretty important conceptual primitive, to start with. Otherwise, it's hard to to really like practically approach like what kind of system could we make to affect those things. If we're not like kind of clear on programmable organizational infrastructure, which is not a native concept to a lot of folks. But yeah, hopefully people can carry out experiments in some sort of suitable environment, so maybe we can have less dystopian government controls everything kind of outcomes. I mean, I think those are cool like experiments, and they seem to capture a lot of mind share though, and people like seem interested in them.
Yeah. It reminds me of what you're saying. It reminds me of the Economic Space Agency, ECSA, where they talk about they're trying to make what they call an economic grammar, where they can start talking about what to do differently without necessarily imposing some sort of structure. They're trying to create sort of an arena where we can maybe discover what we need to know. And I really appreciate what they're doing here, because I don't know if you said this or this is what your intent, but I think that my approach is too heavy-handed in some ways. Like, it's like, okay, this is how it is, guys, so like it or lump it, see you later. But that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm just trying to make one possible implementation and see how close we can get to doing something that could work. It may be very, very far from where we want to end up. So if you're saying that we need more of an open arena for discovery, I agree with that, and I hope we can open it up more.
I'll have to check out Economic Space Agency again. Someone was contributing to Bread Co-op who was who also worked at Economic Space Agency, and she left in part because I think we just weren't cool enough. We weren't post-capitalist enough. It just wasn't interesting. So we must bridge that gap between normies and true post-capitalists. But maybe that's where people need to be as well.
Who is she?
Oh, that was Catherine. She was a designer.
Oh,
I'm over characterizing.
Catherine worked at the post-economic is the Economic Space Agency.
Yeah, I think she's done some design with them.
Oh, okay, fair enough. Yeah, okay. Interesting. I actually met her at a place where the Economic Space Agency also has been, but yeah, I have no idea about the Economic Space Agency. But yeah, I think they were on the Greenpill podcast actually recently, the Economic Space Agency. But Jesus, are you there? Can you speak?
Hello? Are you hear me?
Hello, yes, we can hear you.
Hello, Leo. A pleasure, everyone. Hello, Radher, Unai. Sorry, I didn't be in the conversation during all the presentation. Thank you for your workshop. Just because the connection, things happening, but I try to follow a little bit. I will study deeply in another moment more about, but Leo invite me, hey, talk about, okay, Leo, tell me, what I can talk about?
Yeah, well, I think from this group here, you are probably the most connected to the land from the people here right now. So, yeah, maybe I think it would be interesting if you just want to share about the work that you are doing on the ground with the hub and everything. I think there's a lot of potential interaction points, and then I'm still trying to understand the Earth Change Vending Machine that Patrick is working on. And but yeah, I've been learning, and I see like part of the projects that you're working on, like there's like overlapping ideas. Yeah.
Yeah, the Earth is the only one. It's nice. Thank you, Patrick. Pleasure. I am Jesus. The project where I'm developing and where I'm from is Spain. Is in Alicante, north of Alicante. My background is permaculturist, agriculture, regenerative agriculture, and my studies are forestry engineer. Partial of the year I working for monitoring European grants for agriculture. The PAC, actually in English is different. Some grants they receive. Another part of the time I am in the project where I building Regen Hub, regenerative hub model. Is in 1.5 hectare in the mountains of Mediterranean mountains from in north of Alicante. There. Can you hear me well? Yeah.
Yes, perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, and what's the goal with the land, and what's already happening, and is it a group that's working with this with Region Hub? And yeah, what's the goal? What's the idea? Just for the people here who haven't heard about it before. I don't know if they have, but just yeah.
Thank you. In the beginning, when I am with permaculture, like 20 years doing networking in Spain, mainly east of Spain, and different way of in eco villages and regenerative agriculture, but a lot of networking. Also, there are some movement about communal way of management of the communal land traditionally in different places in Spain, still going like that, mainly for forest. There in Vall de la Guarda, which is the village, where I bought the land, the thing I would love to build during 10 years was
We lost Jesus, right?
Yeah, we lost him. Jesus, can you hear us? No. Yeah, the connection broke again. No.
I wanted to
Jesus,
ask
if you can hear us.
briefly, like,
Yeah, go ahead,
why
Michael.
did you mention EXA?
Rather? Rather, what made you think of the economic space agency?
Sorry, I was away from my mute button. Oh, I think someone mentioned it. I didn't bring it up.
Oh, I thought you did. But maybe not. I don't know. I thought you did. You need to look back into it because of something that was said. But maybe.
Oh no,
don't
I
know.
think it came up in conversation.
Okay. Do you remember, Patrick, how we got to the economic space agency? And Jesus gone. Okay. Well, he came in for a little bit.
I think the topic